Hello and welcome. How are you doing, Steve?
Good. I think, like lots of people, I'm finding the monotony of lockdown a little bit oppressive, but I slowly we're beginning to do some more stuff. So, and what is nice, I think people will value things like seeing friends and nights out and things like that. So, hopefully, some good will come of it.
I couldn't agree more. I've gotten really used to not, I don't know, going to the gym and not feeling guilty about it. I'm like, the gym's locked and I can't go anyways. But apparently
Yeah.
they're opening up in a week, so the guilt's going to start up again. Um, so without further ado, Steve, would you mind telling us your story?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's sort of difficult to know where to start. And I think let me start with the high level view, and then we can dig in a bit. I think when you So having a partner who's ill is one thing. Having a partner who has addiction issues and mental health issues can be a different thing. Because normally, if you have a partner who's ill, you're there to support them, and you understand life is, unfortunately harder than it may have been, but you're in it together. When you have someone who, and this is more the addiction, to be fair, when you have someone who has addiction issues, it can be very hard because ultimately they are destroying themselves, and ultimately they will bring you down as well. So I think when you look at this, the separation has been fairly recent. It's been 4 weeks, but we have been struggling with Ian's issues probably for 6 or 7 years, and they've been fairly severe during that time. And I think when you're out of it, you can begin to see that, like lots of things, people give you lots of advice with the best will in the world. They really want to help. So the idea is they will give you advice. And one of my learnings, and we'll go back to the story, is do listen to people's advice. They are trying to be helpful. I can't tell you what made me decide to take the advice 4 or 5 weeks ago. There was no flash, like light bulb moment or like a switch going on or something like that. I was talking to my therapist as a sidetrack, by the way. I think therapists are amazingly helpful for partners, and we can talk a bit about some of the support networks available for partners of people with addiction issues later on. But I think that, I was talking to him, and it was just that realization within myself that it was probably time to call it a day. Now, I'm sort of giving, it's like one of these novels where we give you the end of the story and there's a flashback to the beginning. But I certainly don't regret the decision. I'm feeling very sad about it, but like all of my other friends now, I think we realize it's the right decision. So how did we get to where we are today? I think it's fairly gradual. You don't decide on a dating app to put down, would love to date alcoholic. It's not really something that comes up. So I think it's been a gradual, there's two ways of looking at it. There's things I will know, which are my experiences of it, and things I won't know, which is how Ian's brain has worked through addiction. I like a party, I like a drink, but an addiction is a very different animal, and it's very difficult to understand somebody who is talking through an addictive personality screen, if you like, the mask that covers their behavior. So we first noticed it, let's say that in about 2012. We had just come back from living in Moscow for a number of years. And Moscow was a fairly hard charging town, and we were fairly hard charging people. So, most if not all nights we'd be out. We'd either be at an event, something diplomatic, some ball, or we'd just be at a local bar, or there were various expat haunts. And it was one of those bars where you just turn up and somebody would be there that you would know. So it was lovely and all great fun. And you had a driver, and life was seemingly quite sweet. We'd been there about 8 years, and after a while, it was time to come home. And I think that's when we begun to notice that when we slowed down, we were then, say, early 40s. And I think we partied probably quite hard for sort of 15 years. We began to slow down, and it was very obvious that I would come home and Ian would have had a drink. And it wasn't we all do the things where I went out with Bob, to use pick a random name, had a lunch, we had one too many, so I'm a bit pissed, sorry. And we goes, oh, fine. It was regular, and it was quite hardcore, and it came with an air of sadness, I think. Because I think for someone who is an alcoholic, there is a realization how hard this is to control. And it's that kind of realization that you're out of control. So we put Ian went into rehab. You can't put anybody anywhere, which is, unfortunately, I'd say one of the problems of dealing with someone with alcoholism is that you can put them in a place and they can walk straight out and there's nothing anybody can do, which comes back to one of the first things that I know is right, but you have to hear it a number of times and see it for yourself, is essentially that if somebody doesn't want to get better and doesn't want to help with this situation, it simply won't happen. It doesn't matter what you do as a partner to help them. And in fact, often in helping them, you are probably making the system, the issue worse, because effectively you're creating a framework that will, in helping them, looking after them, tidying up, making sure things get managed while they continue to drink. On the one hand, superficially, it sounds very helpful. Take a step back, and it's what's called, it's classic enablement. I was enabling Ian by building a framework that allowed him to continue drinking. And so he continued drinking. So there has been a downward slope. It hasn't been as bad as it has been for the whole 8 years. He went into rehab. And I think the shame of doing it was very helpful when he came out. Shame can be a very powerful emotion. My concern about shame as a powerful emotion is definitely, it's right to say, shame only works once. If you're ashamed of your behavior and it causes you to stop, that's great. If you're ashamed of your behavior and yet you do it again, the shame is a little less the following time and the following time and so on. And by the end, I don't think you're particularly ashamed of your behavior. But if I turn it back on myself as the partner, equally, we lived in a situation that I somehow equated as being quite normal. And yet you needed that jolt when outsiders, friends or family, would peer through the curtain at your lifestyle, and most of them like, Jesus fucking Christ, what the hell are you doing? So we had a situation once where I had rung Ian and he didn't pick up the phone. The other thing with dealing with someone with an addiction issue is that you are on edge 24/7 because you don't know when they've decided to have a drink. So there's different types of alcoholism. Some is like, I party too hard, so the day is fine. I work in an office. I'm a functioning alcoholic. I go at 6 o'clock, don't get home till 3 every night. That's one type. Ian's was definitely, and this is the difficulty with the overlay of alcoholism and mental health, you wouldn't know when his brain would decide it was time for a drink. So it could be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, could be at 9 o'clock in the morning. So if you're out and you're doing things and you have an evening event and Ian doesn't answer the phone, you have to go home because we have dogs and he might have fallen down the stairs, which you've had a couple of times. So the immediate reaction is having to drop everything every time and go. So you're always, if you were looking at an animal in a zoo or one of these wildlife programs, David Attenborough would be pointing about, how tiring it is for this animal to always be at this heightened level of sensitivity. You're on edge. You're very nervous all the time because you're going to call. And I would find myself, you'd ring and you'd be like, please God answer, please God answer. Go to message and it was like, you haven't answered your phone, please call me in 20 minutes. And then you call again after an hour and Ian wouldn't. And you're like, okay. And friends would be very supportive, and my colleagues at work, I'm saying I have to go home again, I'm afraid, and he'd be asleep on the sofa drunk. But sometimes he'd be fine, sometimes the dog hadn't been fed. One time he'd fallen off the sofa and cut his head open, so that was a big mess. So you have this going on all the time. And I think the problem with lots of these things is if you deal with one thing, if you deal with alcoholism, there is a behavior and there's a habit, and there is a rationality of some sort to your brain that helps you understand how to manage that. If you have mental health issues, your backstop, which is your brain functioning normally and saying, I must rationally think of a system to get out of this, doesn't seem to work. I say doesn't seem to. The conclusion we've come to talking to some experts is, I will never understand how Ian's brain works. But if you try and think, if you're frustrated that he doesn't reason rationally about things, you're just hurting yourself. He just doesn't anymore. And so the thing is, he's got this, so the condition is bipolar 2. I don't know why it's changed its name. It used to be called manic depression. And so the depression, funny enough, is the easiest thing. He drinks less in the depression. It's the mania where his head won't stop running. He talks about noise. It's not noise as in, I must go and kill the prime minister noise. It's just general hyperactivity. Like, you have days and meetings where you've got 20 things to do and your brain is fuzzing, you have coffee and, it's like that, but it's all day and all night. So he won't sleep for days and days. And so the wine, when people think of alcoholics, like I say, you're over an evening, you drink 3 bottles, tut, tut, tut. Ian would drink 2 bottles of wine in about 20 minutes. And it's just a way, as he said, to get the noise to stop. And the consequences of that, and I will pause because I remember what the conversation was talking about shame, is that our lifestyle, and we can talk about it a bit more, became so chaotic and so awful. And yet, because it was very gradual, you do need people to, as I said, peer behind the curtain and give you a metaphorical shake and say, what the hell is going on?
I remember when you and I spoke before, I think one of those examples was, you said your mom was over and Ian was on the floor, passed out, and you just were so numb to it. It was so normal. And you were like, come on, let's watch TV. And he was on the floor and she was like, what the hell?
I know. And you just managed the situation. So we'd come in, and I don't know where we'd been. I think we'd been in London. I say, come back. I said, Ian may have been drinking. And my grandfather was a drunk. I don't think alcohol was a drunk. So mum is very sensitive about this stuff. And yeah, he was just passed out on the floor. And she was like, I was like, I can't rouse him. What shall we do? And I was like, he'll come round. Don't worry about it. We put him in the recovery position. And he was, I didn't even notice, but my mum was horrified. He was literally between us and the television in the living room. And for me, I'm just, eventually got up and went to bed. And mum was like, oh my God. And I was like, I know, what a gripping program. No, she was like, no. How is this? How is this in any way? How is this normal? How do you think? And it's just like, well, you know what? This is somebody's behavior and it doesn't change. And I want this to be a positive story. And what I want, if people are in similar situations, what I want them to understand is you will do things that looking back, you feel were wrong, or you feel were weak, or where you feel you weren't decisive enough. And when I've talked, other friends have now come to me with, particular issues with addiction themselves or addiction with their partners. And what I've always said is, look, the thing is, if you're an addict, there is the golden conversation you want to have, which is where you're confronted by your partner. Your partner says, if you do that again, it's over. And what happens is you do it again, but because your partner loves you, they'll make an excuse. Right, well, okay, but look, I really, really mean it this time. Next time you do it, it's over. That's the golden conversation for an addict, because what they hear is, I can do this, and the partner, who's my support and enabler, will never leave. And I said, when people talk about it, or ask me to explain my experiences, I always say, never do that unless you are absolutely prepared to throw somebody out the first time they do it again. And there's always a little pause, and I'll say, and now I'll tell you the reality of the situation is nobody ever throws them out the first time. Because you always think, if I really shout and scream and stamp my feet, they will get a handle on it. So everybody falls into that trap of being hopeful. That's it. You think this will change. But I think you have to understand that you will make a lot of empty threats, and that's petrol on the fire for somebody who's got addiction issues. And yes, as you were saying, I think it's that what gets super depressing, I think, is the realization of how disempowered you feel. Over time, your behavior changes. You don't go out, you don't see people because you've got to be at home caring. And being a carer, that happens to people in relationships all the time. The frustration is there is a deliberateness and a vindictiveness in my own experience, but I think from talking to other people, we'll talk about more about support groups. There's a support group called Al-Anon. So it's like AA, but it's for family and partners of people with alcoholism issues. So that meets it's very similar. It's very good for a while. I found it a bit samey in the group I was in, so there we are. But I think what you find is your behavior changes, and what you realize, I think with alcoholism, and I think I mentioned this before, I can understand why in ye olde days people would think about exorcisms. They didn't know about alcoholism, but why they would think about exorcisms for people who were alcoholics, because there's definitely two personalities in the same body. There's the rational person. No, I shouldn't drink. That's right. I understand it's destructive. I understand I'm not coping. I can't look after myself. I can't look after our pets. I can't look after our children. This needs to stop. And then there's the other character that will just say, you know what, fuck all that. I want to drink. And the problem is, and it is a bit like an exorcism or a demon. I mean, they called you demons for a reason, I think, is that if you, the longer you take to tackle that demon, I think the stronger it becomes. And over time, what becomes an inner trait with someone who has alcohol issues, I think it becomes an outer trait. You know, so I am now aware which Ian I'm talking to when we have a conversation. They are very different characters. And there's one who's trying hard, and there's one who will just, without hesitation, without blush, without blinking, will just lie through their teeth to you. Because that's what they've been trained to do to achieve their goal. And their goal is to drink without people nagging them. And over time, and I think we've talked about this before, if the person can't get the help they need or don't want to accept the help they're given, which I think is Ian's situation, you see less and less of the person that you love and more of the person who looks a lot like them, but would happily sell you down the river for one more bottle of $6.99 wine from the garage.
Wow. And did you ever feel like you could speak to, I think you said, you know, people at work were understanding when you needed to go home? Was that because you were open about what was going on?
Yes, and I think it's, I mean, early on, we always said we'd be very open, particularly because initially there was, because of the link with mental health, I think it's very important we talk about mental health more. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of it, I think some of the alcoholism was related to Ian's very big mood swings because of the bipolar issues. The problem with this, the problem you have anyway is I have spoken to a number of people, lots and lots of people over the years, and you say, so here is the thing. I don't think this is as uncommon. You know, you always in life you always think your experiences are unique to you. So you think you're a certain character, and nobody's like you. You'll go to a therapist, and in 3 sessions they'll say, you're person A who likes this, who doesn't do this, and you do this in a crisis. You're like, fuck off, really? Really? Is that how simple it is? Often it is. And then you go to these groups and you see there are lots of people. I know lots and lots of people who I would say are very, and Ian is super intelligent. Sadly, I think we'll talk about some of the brain injury stuff. That is not the case anymore, I don't think. And there's quite a strong correlation between intelligence, bipolar, interesting enough, and then addiction. But I think the addiction, particularly alcoholism, is to manage some of the bipolar issues. And yet, I look at this, and you talk to the NHS, and you talk to private doctors, and also rehab. I mean, he's been rehab 8 times. I think there are 3 different providers. One of the best ones was just basically where he was allowed to live in the home, but above the garage. So he was like a guest, if you like, in the rehab centre for about 6 months down in Devon. The other difficulty is, of course, with someone who is an alcoholic, is they become immensely unreliable. So while I talk about now having recently just separated, if you look at it through a different lens, I've been largely single probably for the last 4 or 5 years. You know, I've gone to weddings on my own. I've taken friends along to events. We've had tickets to the theatre, to opera, where I've just gone on my own. You know, and then you're like, hang on a second, where is and part of the discussion at some stage is, you know, you understand that nothing turns out like a fairy tale in life. And things are often tougher than you would like or hope them to be. And that's fine. You know, when people say that's life, that really is, that's true. That's life. That's how it works. But I think with someone who has addiction issues as well, there's a core selfishness because they have one main goal in life, which is to get to that next drink. And everything else is a second tier issue. When I finally had the discussion with Ian that we were separating, he said, you and the dogs are the two most important things in my life. And I said, I'll be honest, Ian, there are three most important things in your life, and neither me or the dogs are number one. And so what you find is, you end up living your life on your own. And the idea is what you don't get, which becomes very hollowing in the end, is there is no support from, what are partnerships about? Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're terrible, sometimes they're good, sometimes it's a disaster, sometimes it's a crisis, but you're always there to support each other. And when you talk to people and they say, when were you last supported by Ian? And you really have to think back, because his support network now is him and alcohol. And I'm joking and being a bit facetious, but it's not, I'm just the maid who comes in and cleans around him.
Yeah. And I think what you said, that point about enabling, is very interesting, because so many people think that they're doing the right thing by, letting them off the hook and not speaking about it in the morning, their behavior, or like you said, cleaning up, so they wake up and don't realize the destruction they've done. But that really does actually hinder the problem, because they're not held to any kind of consequence.
Yeah, oh, completely. And I think everything is, nothing is simple in this issue, but it's also compounded by the fact that there's some, the next morning or whatever, there's some remorse. You can see they're trying hard. And what you want to say is, you fucking bastard, how can you possibly do this to me? This has gone on for months. Me, the dogs, I'm worn out. My life is shit. Sort your nonsense out. But the problem is, you're kind of hoping they stop drinking. And so what happens is, you then end up walking on eggshells all the time. So a lot of times I was thinking, I really should say how I feel at the moment, because I'm so angry you've just done something. And I was like, oh God, well, if I have a row, I'm going to go to work the next day, and I'm going to come back and he's drunk. Well, and again, people give you a lot of advice, and I think you have to reach that realization yourself. You can be, fine. You can shout and scream and he gets a bottle the next day. Fact is, I've walked on eggshells for years and years and years. And when I'm away, he still picks up a drink. So my behavior designed to not weaken him or distress him or something like that, in the end made absolutely fuck all difference to the situation. And it comes back down to, it's very hard when you're in a long-term relationship. So we were together 25 years and you love somebody, to finally understand those words, that it's only down to them. Whatever you do won't make a jot of difference. And often you can only make it worse, a bit like enabling, by seeming to do things that on the face of them look like the right things to do as somebody's partner. And then what you find is, of course, that, well, you will always, if they don't want to help themselves, you'll always reach a situation where, unfortunately, I think the relationship will end, because nothing you can do. I mean, when I'd said to friends who'd been nagging me now for 2 or 3 years, even my parents, you're 50, don't let this get to 60, kind of things. Like, I know you're right, and I just need to sort it out. But you don't really want to do it. You just think, if I close my eyes and wish really hard, like Tinkerbell or something like that, something will happen. But life isn't like that, and there's a tipping point. So Ian was in rehab again over Christmas in South Africa. He likes South Africa, and so we flew him out there. He came out from rehab, and we have a house down there with a friend staying there. He was drinking again 3 days later, and again, another jolt, again, peering behind the curtain. Our friend Phil rang me and said, how do you live like this? I'm literally about to throw him off the balcony, because he's drunk, he's creating mess everywhere. He fell over and was sick and has just walked off. The fridge is full of milk that's gone off already because he didn't leave the door. I mean, it took a week to clean after him being there for 3 days. So we got him back into rehab again. He checked himself out, came back just in time for lockdown. Friends would say, have you thought about sectioning him? And I said, oh, bless. You clearly don't know what section means. There's no way you can section somebody because they have, unless they're a danger to them, imminent danger to themselves or others, That's usually the test for sectioning. Where we got to was we'd had 3 weeks of lockdown, and I began to say, we started to talk about, we need to have a big talk, maybe with a counsellor or something like that, as to what needs to change. I'm not happy, you're not happy. I'm assuming we still want to continue this relationship. And so, and he was struggling a bit and slow. I mean, the other thing you find over years of alcoholism, there is a deterioration. As an example, he walks, funnily now, he walks with a very wide stance. I spoke to a doctor and they said that's a sign of what they call cerebellum shrinkage, where his brain has shrunk because of alcohol. And he finds it your balance starts going. It's very difficult for him. He can't walk by putting one foot in front of the other now, which you and I would do that normally, just he can't do it anymore. You start losing some functionality. But anyway, 3 weeks in, he went to walk get the paper, walk the dog, the big dog, the one who was just barking. And he didn't come back. So I was like, oh, okay. And I thought, I know what this is, because there'd been an episode the previous day where I thought he'd had a drink. So my car had a flat battery, so I couldn't do anything. And I thought, I'll just leave it. I'll get the dog, because the dog's shut in the car, and I'll leave him. He can, sleep it off and whatever. We'll have that's it. I said, I really can't do anymore. Anyway, he didn't come back with the dog, but a policewoman did, to say what's happened. Of course, he's been found in the village, passed out in the car. But of course, he had car keys, so it's an offence. So he's been arrested. And they asked, they came around the next morning, because I thought I'd be able to collect him that evening, because once he'd sobered up, they were going to charge him. In fact, I got a visit from the police the next morning saying there's been some problems and he has a head injury. Now, it turns out with hindsight that he'd clearly, I think, fallen and hit his head before they arrested him. But he also fell quite badly while in a police cell. So there's currently an independent investigation going on as to how that happened, whether he was being looked after properly. So they thought there might be an issue with domestic violence. So they wanted to come and look around the house. And this is 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was fully dressed only because I'd slept on the sofa waiting for the call to go and collect him. And this is the other point. When we talk about selfishness and whatever, an addict will do something entirely not thinking about the damage it will cause to the people who love them. They don't care. So when I say they, remember there's two people. The addict doesn't care. Ian cares, but by this stage, he's just not the strong enough voice in that new partnership. So what happened was, it was a very bad head injury. He'd had 3 brain hemorrhages, I think, through the 2 falls. And they'd rushed him from the local hospital in Kent up to King's Hospital in London, because it's the neuro teaching hospital. And, I know everybody says this, but the health service could not have been more amazing if they tried, and they were wonderful. There was a point where he was on a ventilator, a point on the ventilator when he was totally non-responsive. They took the sedation down to 0. And if you know anything about it, you have a tube down your throat. You take the sedation down to 0, people normally try and take the tube out, but he didn't, which was a sign. And there was a time, I thought we were going to have the call, and this is during the COVID era, of course, during lockdown. I thought I was going to have the call where they said, do you want to come visit? Which of course would have been you're allowed to go for a final visit, was the exception they made in hospitals. As it happens, not ironically, but he made an almost miraculous recovery. So we'd thought, initially they'd said there's a 18-month rehab program where he'll need to have people in 2 or 3 times a day, and they'll be walking, and there'll be assisted living, and can you put a stair lift in, and all this kind of stuff. And in the end, he came out and he was fine. Slow, thin, hairy, because he didn't have a haircut, and fine. And that was a Wednesday. And I'm in the house in London now. So because of the better care here, we have a house in London, a house down in the country. He was staying here. On the Saturday night, I went down to the house in London. A friend was coming up from Brighton, and we have a business together. So we were going to go out. We weren't going to go out. We were going to stay and have a drink. And I needed some planting in the garden. I know it sounds terribly tedious, but otherwise all those plants had arrived and they were going to die. So I said, I'll see you tomorrow lunchtime. Fine. You'll be okay. Yeah. And this is the problem. The other problem as well, as a sidetrack. When someone's an addict, it's very hard to be in a relationship with someone where you simply don't believe a word they say. Are you going to be fine? And then I always say, I don't know why I asked that question. I don't know why I asked that question, because I don't know if you're lying to me anymore about anything. Anyway, I got back on the Sunday lunchtime with the dogs, and he was drunk. And there's a bottle of wine behind the behind the table in the living room, wherever it was. And then this is a very typical conversation. You've had a drink. No, I haven't. Fuck, we're not going to do this again. You've had a drink. Right, here's how I know you've had a drink. You look drunk. It's the tablets. Okay, here's how I know you've had a drink too. Here's an empty bottle of wine that's just behind the sofa. Wasn't me. Who was it then? The fucking hamster? You know, as you get to this, like, yeah. And you get, so just say you've had, I've not had a drink. Just say you've had a drink. I've been out. There's a bottle here. I go up to the bedroom. There's another bottle under the bed that's empty. And he said, they've been there ages. No, because I cleaned this house from top to bottom. And when I say clean, unfortunately for partners of alcoholics, that's a euphemism for just removing all the empties from the very, you'll open airing cupboards, you'll open cupboard, underwear drawers. You can't see here. There's an old radiogram from my parents. Open that where the LP should have been, full of bottles. You know, there are bottles down the side of armchairs. I mean, everywhere. And the problem about being a drunk is you're not particularly sophisticated. I mean, just put them in I never occurred to check the bin because I don't have to, because they're just hidden somewhere. It's almost like people want to get caught. But anyway, so this, if you imagine you've got the situation where someone had been in a life-threatening situation, near-death experience, because of their drinking, coming out of hospital, and 3 days later they were drinking again. So I said, right, I don't know what else to say. I said, I can't offer any more help, and I can't make myself any more false promises that we're really going to try and you're really going to work it out, because I just don't think you are. It's up to you now to decide how this ends. And even then at this stage, we're still, I mean, he's down in Kent now and his sisters have come up, but he was in London. And the point was then I came back 3 days later because the GP wanted to see him and he didn't open the door, didn't answer the phone, all this kind of stuff. He was very slow. We had him admitted to hospital again and there were some problems with liver failure. So the dry out helped him again. And he's been back down in Kent now because he wanted to stay there. So I've moved up here for 10 days. And it's fascinating. There are times when you hear phrases and you want to believe them. And there's times when, and after years and years and years, you hear phrases, you're like, don't make me laugh. So my mum said, so that's good. How long has he not been drinking for today? And I was like, Mum, that's an entirely irrelevant question. We have counted days before and it's gone from 3 to 7 to 14 to 21. And you think, as soon as you think, finally, I think we're there. Day 26, he doesn't answer his phone and he's passed out on the floor and he's pissed himself. You know, so you just have to at some stage say, I've got to stop hoping. And we say this, I think the phrase, it's the hope that kills you, I think is a very significant one. Because I see signs of hope in Ian's behaviour, but I know they're not signs of hope. It's like an anglerfish holding that little lit worm above their jaws. It's not a sign of hope. It's a trap. It's designed to suck you in again so that you fall over and make the same mistakes. And all the while, Ian's prime directive, which is to consume more alcohol, is being met. So when he gives you those signs of hope, you have to understand, in essence, even the core behavior that you'd expect between two partners is ultimately a lie. And there is very little there. And if there is something there now, good. But I have to, for my own, and this is where we got to a few weeks ago, for my own self-esteem and frankly for my own survival, you have to walk away. And interesting enough, currently, his sisters and I, and this sounds really odd, are 90% sure he's understood that I've left. But sometimes he'll make a comment, and I don't want to keep saying, you know, we have separated, you know, we have split up, don't you? But I think he's kind of hoping that I'll come back. I'll make another exception. And you know, if I were him, I'd hope that too, because I've done that for years and years and years. And it's a very hard thing when you finally say, the well is dry. You know, every time somebody treats you badly, it's not that you don't love them any less. It's your ability to be with them. A little bit of that peels off. And eventually you get to the stage where you just say, I just don't want to be here. I'd love for it to work out, but I just need to be away from here. Here is not a geography. It's a situation. It's the space you're inhabiting. I just need to be away from here. And all those signs of hope where I think that you were getting better, those sparks where I saw the old you, I don't think they were reigniting anything. Maybe they were just like embers from a dying fire.
Wow. It must have been really hard, but also, did you feel relieved when you finally made that decision?
It's funny, you feel there are a lot of things you feel guilty about. And yeah, you know what? It's odd. Relief was odd. I can't say I was, clicking my heels and running down the street for joy. But there was something where it's like taking off a very tight pair of shoes, or a heavy, it's like a weight that had just been removed.
Yeah.
And it will take a while for me, discussions we have with my therapist actually, to work out. It will take a while for me to work out what me actually is. Because we've been together since I was 25, so that's 20, God, Jesus Christ, really good 26 years, been together since I was 25.
Wow.
Everything you have in a house, and a lot of the experience you have are shared experiences. So there is a me under there, I'm sure. I'm not a hand puppet. But me has always been one half of a relationship. I don't like the phrase the other half, because I think you should be very independent as couples. However, I do think you tend to start knitting together, because that's what you do. If you didn't do that, then you'd be two good friends, if you like. So that's the next stage in the journey, I think. And if it's one of the things to have a takeaway is, there'll be moments when your brain simply, and it's perfectly understandable and everybody will do it, your brain just doesn't. My brain did not function for years properly, because if it did, and I would have taken the advice of friends and been much harder much earlier. I can't say with hindsight I should have left 2 or 3 years earlier, because that's not right. You're ready to call it when you're ready to call it, and not a day before. And in fact, when you're not ready to call it, endless advice from people becomes very tiring very quickly. But the reason I can get ratty with people when they were saying this advice is probably I knew they were right, but I just wasn't prepared to let it go until like I said, I don't trigger it. I think with Ian's hospital experience, coming out and drinking again, I think I'd realized I can no longer pretend to make up, this situation. Well, maybe the next time he'll really get it. As slowly the situation's got worse and worse. First time he was unconscious. First time he fell over and vomited. First time I came back and found him asleep on the driveway because he was so drunk. All these things you think, okay, that's definitely, I'd be so ashamed. I would go to AA and fix it. And he resolutely won't go to any of these groups at all. He doesn't like AA. And I think there are so many different types of AA that I suspect when he says, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like the other, he's just saying, I just feel like saying, just have the balls to say, I'm not going to go. I don't want to go. So I think this last time, a near-death experience, there is no further level. You can say, well, maybe that wasn't rock bottom. Maybe the next step down is rock bottom. Well, there is no other step down from a near-death experience other than death. And so I think that maybe that was it, where you just say, okay, you win. I can't fabricate in my head. Even I can't rationalize this story now that would make me able to stay, I think is the issue.
I think something that's been quite clear throughout your whole story is that it sounds like you have quite supportive friends and family. How long ago did you tell them? Have you been open this whole time?
So as I'm a lawyer, the answer is yes and no. Yes, open. But and I'll be super honest with you now, Jess. There's things I haven't told you in this conversation either, because I'm too embarrassed that they happened. So what happens is you start hiding things from your friends as well. This is the way you get sucked in. It's almost a form of grooming. You become unable to share experiences where you might need advice or help with your friends because it's just too fucking embarrassing. And you feel like an idiot. Because my brain still functions in a semi-rational way, I still feel I am ashamed about Ian's behavior. I'm so ashamed I won't tell you some of the stuff that went on. But he doesn't have that. So in the end, you end up carrying the shame for both of you. But having said that, sometimes when I know I'm not being honest, friends who've had experience, and what you'll find actually, particularly for alcoholism, is I'm amazed how many people it's touched. So even, I know it sounds, again, tearing the class, but we have a gardener who comes on Wednesdays, and he said, how's Ian? And the guy fixes my car. We're in a little village, basically, because everybody knows everybody else. And they're going to pop in, and I said to Wukesh, the gardener, well, he's back on the booze again, and he's like, oh, I had problems with my father, and my best friend died of alcoholism. So look, I'll just keep an eye on him when I'm here. I'll just pop in and say hi. No, he doesn't. He says, I'll just keep an eye. So people do things. They'll try and help, and they'll try and give good advice, and just be someone where you just want to say, I'm glad you're here. Can we not talk about it? So sometimes I have to talk about it. Sometimes, you know what, I feel like I spend my whole life, particularly with the stuff that's gone in hospital recently, I feel I spend my whole life talking to well-meaning friends about what's going on. And they are all good friends of both of us. I think what's been a shame over the years is they've been super supportive of me and initially super supportive of Ian. But again, from the outside vantage point, they can see how destructive this has been on me and how miserable my life has been. And what that's meant over time, I think, that they're wanting to communicate or associate with Ian has diminished. So we've had some very good friends who've said, I love you. I'm just not prepared to go out with you anymore, with you and Ian anymore, because of how he's treated you. And I would say, well, look, surely how he's treated me is my concern. And you're like, oh God, this is exactly a battered wife conversation. He loves me deep down. I know I've got a black eye, but you shouldn't judge him on that. I'm like, this is where you a little bit withdraw, because a lot of the stuff that you normally share with friends is just shameful to you. But there, I'd also say as well, with some friends, particularly the link with alcoholism and mental health, lots of friends want to help. Very few have that joint background where I think they can give good advice. Packages are always good. Look, I accept that as well. So, obviously, a friend of mine insisted I went into therapy over the whole thing. And with hindsight, of course, that was a very good, she's American, so everybody has therapy. We're British, we have tea. But I did decide it was a good idea to go and have therapy. And that's been great for 3 years. And I actually have to say, I can almost sense, we do it by Zoom, obviously, at the moment, almost sense the relief in my therapist's voice when I said it's over. Because again, I think every look is saying it's not going to, people who deal with this all the time will say it's not getting any better, is it? No. So what are you still doing there? I don't know. But no, so friends are supportive. I mentioned Al-Anon before. That's a very supportive group, ultimately to make you understand that your situation is very similar to lots of other people's. And the emotions you feel, so you want to hang in there. There's not a right time, so you hang in there too long, so you feel ashamed about that. Then you feel bad, so you might lash out at your partner. Then you feel bad that you've lashed out, verbally or whatever with them. And then you're like, and then you try everything. So you sit there and say, I've tried shouting, I've tried coaxing, I've tried bribing, I've tried the silent treatment. And everyone sits there and goes, yeah. And what have we learned? Nothing changes, and it's, it's, what was the phrase they use? You didn't cause it, you can't help it, and you can't fix it. It's just, they will do it or they won't. And that's mostly been an advice we've had. When the mental health gets thrown into the mix, things are a lot more complicated. And I'm not sure we've even scratched the surface there of I can't tell you to this day, it sounds odd, after 25 years now, I've got no idea what he's thinking at any time at all. I'll say, how are you? Fine. I'm like, it's my instinct, like, don't ask stupid question to ask. Don't ask how he is because you don't know. But I actually think people allowing you a break from this, it's a very destructive relationship. And a good friend of ours was talking to his friend who's a recovering alcoholic, and Simon said, I don't know what to do. Should I perhaps Ian should come and live with me? This guy was like, that's the most fucking stupid thing I've ever heard. Never, ever, like vampires, never bring an alcoholic willingly across your door, because they will destroy you in the process as well. And I think it's very hard, because somebody loves you, but they are destroying you. And what's sad, for them, I think, or when you think about them, is they know they're destroying you too in the more rational moments. I think for instance, one of the saddest parts of dementia are those moments you see when somebody's mind clears again and they realize they have dementia and then it goes back in again. That horror when they realize what they have, that in 5 minutes they won't recognize you again. And I think it's the same with addiction. You know, I don't know how it becomes very self-fulfilling. The guilt you feel at knowing you're destroying your own partner drives you to drink. And that's the really difficult thing to get out of. So maybe when I'm out of it, it may be the impetus he needs now. I mean, it's just, you know, ask me in 6 months if he hasn't had a drink, and then I'll have an idea about whether this might work or not. But until, and you can't, you know, and sometimes there's other non-medical advice that friends give that are good. You know, a lot of people say your life has been on hold now for like 5 or 6 years, and it's not getting any better. You know, you have a life too. You're entitled to some fun. And then you think, oh, I feel selfish now. But the fact is they're right. You know, my staying in this situation and looking after him, where in most circumstances a partnership is entirely natural and the right thing to do, is entirely the wrong thing to do. So I would say, yeah, so they've been supportive. There's various groups, and somebody who's outside your friendship circle as well. Because after so many years, all your friends are usually joint friends. What's telling over the last few years is how many friends I have now that are good friends that Ian has never met. Partly being reclusive because of the mental health, partly because he's been in rehab, partly because he's too drunk to come out, and stuff like that. So after a while, I think there's a realization that you have been living a separate life, or as a single life, if you like, for a number of years. And you never wish somebody ill. It's not deliberate on their part. It's just something they can't control. And if they're going to go underwater and not come up again, they need not to be holding on to you.
Is there any key advice you'd like to give to anyone, a partner who's going through it, and people who haven't had any exposure and don't really know, but might like meet you? What would you say to those two people?
Yeah. So what I would say to me is, life is going to be hard enough without beating yourself up. You know, you will get things wrong all the time, and you will look back and go, how the hell did I think that was going to work? It doesn't matter. You know, the fact is you as a loving partner will make mistakes you'll make all of the wrong decisions for all of the right reasons. And the only way you will ever get to the right decision is to have made all of the wrong ones first. You know, those stories where in the end, there's only one answer left and you have killed every other answer, basically, and that's it. And you will do that because you you can't deny your base instincts, which is to try and help. We'll do this, we'll try this, okay, put him here. And so it's a process. Understand that you'll make mistakes. People who have been through that process shouldn't beat you up over that because they'll have made the same mistakes as well. Just don't forget to breathe and don't forget to talk to other people, particularly people in their circumstances. And if you're not used to it, and a friend comes and says, I've got this problem, sometimes in life, it's all right to say, I have no idea what to do in that situation. What I found was, what used to annoy me was unwanted advice. So don't feel the urge. I've got a friend, and sometimes I will say to her, about to use her name, not every problem needs your advice. So she's like, but I think I could, no. Sometimes someone tells me their problem and I will say, oh dear, that's awful. Because you know what? I know they don't want advice. They just want to tell me, and they want somebody to say, I'll give you a hug. Can I get you a drink? That's it. Because actually, in the end, it can't be fixed. And you just have to, so if they just, why are they seeing you? I became very attuned to people who would have experience of this and who wouldn't. So you might dip your toe into the water and someone will say something, you're like, okay, they get it. Or they say something daft. What about a shower and perhaps getting out to the park? Oh yeah, that really cures clinical depression. Genius. But then that's your inner voice. You just don't discuss it with them again. Yeah. So if you're a friend, what are friends there for? if you're a good friend with some emotional intelligence, which you should have, you know when to talk, when to listen, when to advise, and when to nod. And I think all of those four, if you do it at the right time, will be the support you need.
And how are you doing now? Are you feeling a little bit more consistent with this is over, my future is looking brighter?
I don't know. As you can see, I feel a bit more positive in some ways. I've had a long chats with a friend of mine. I've known him longer than Ian, whose husband died suddenly in school in January. Just fell ill and was dead by the time the ambulance arrived. And we were talking. Bizarrely, he thinks my situation is worse than his, and I'm still not sure I quite rationalise why. But I think yes, I do feel more positive. But you know, this has been a relationship of 25 years. I've seen people who've come out of these the wrong way, you know, through illness or death or something like that. And there's always an air of melancholy about them because there's something terrible that's happened in their life, and often you can see it when you speak to them, no matter how jolly or whatever they're being. That, you know, your quiet moments, it tends to be there more than your active moments. How am I feeling now? It's still what we mentioned earlier. I still think there's the relief that I'm not sitting here thinking, shit, should I ring? Shit, should I ring? It's too needy. I rang 20 minutes ago. What if he's drunk? Well, perhaps I could do this. I could be home by 7 if I left now. And it's like I've got my full computing capacity in my brain back instead of 15% of it endlessly on Ian alert. So that's nice. Friends have been lovely. I have probably, COVID's been great for that. Kept myself a little bit to myself recently because again, I don't, you know, it's nice if somebody wants to hear your story and all your friends want to hear what's going on. But that means you could 6 or 7 times a day you tell the story, and it can be quite draining. So at the moment, I'm sort of tiptoeing. It would look odd if it wasn't a lockdown situation. I think it's just me and the dogs at the moment in the house here, and I'm doing some decorating and sorting it out. I've got new lodger coming in, and I've ordered some new shirts. You know, I also think when you get beaten down, I'm looking at it's like, what? This is a nice shirt, by the way, just before you comment. But you know, like, thank you, darling. I was like, just throw this shit away. You know, what are you doing? And you know, doing more weight training. It's not, by the way, it's not because I'm on the dating scene again. Jesus Christ. I can't do anything worse. It's just, you know, I'm going to look in a mirror and feel good about myself. And I think that's been a long time coming. But I do feel there's some green shoots there.
That's really positive to hear. And I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much for coming on and for being so vulnerable. I hope it empowers others to do the same, or at least know they're not alone in what they're going through. So thank you very much. And
you're welcome.
I look forward to seeing you soon in London.
Indeed. Thank you very much.